In the Roblox tower defense scene, there is no more iconic enemy than the final boss. Whether it's an ultimate test of your abilities or a simple victory lap, the importance and majesty of a TD game final boss cannot be understated. But today, we're not necessarily concerned with all of that nonsense. No, instead, I want to compare and see which of the 3 most popular Roblox tower defense final bosses are the most powerful. And I don't mean by just comparing the raw stats. What do you think I am, Zambi? No. Instead, I want to compare their abilities, their lore, and their armies to see which would exactly win in an all-out war. So, who are our contestants? Well, allow me to introduce them. The Void, the ancient god from the abyss. The Fallen King, a long-dead warrior king brought back from forces beyond. And the Overlord, a planet-conquering god with an iron grip on the universe. But which of these 3 big boys is canonically the strongest, however? Well, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and without further ado, let's jump into it. But before we begin, I want to set a few rules. Like I said, we are looking at their abilities, their feats, and their lore, and their armies. No stats like health or shield or defense or anything like that, because obviously the balance is different between these 3 games. No sides are allowed outside help either. This means that no Lord Exo or hardcore fallen enemies for AFK, no multipliers or Dr. Xenon for the Void, and no Avarians or Corrupted for the Overlord. Third, we are only looking at their abilities within the canon, meaning stuff like Tower Battles Battlefront does not count for the Void. Sadly, this is also the reason I cut Kronos, as according to TBZ lore, Kronos is the former shadow of the Overlord, and after learning the truth of the universe, he was forcefully stripped of that form and has no way of accessing it ever again. Oh, and remember, this is all just for fun, so don't take things so seriously. If you disagree with the outcome, make sure to actually explain yourself instead of throwing a temper tantrum. Thanks. Alright, so with that out of the way, all those theatrics, let's actually get into who exactly our contestants are, what they can do, and all of that good stuff. First up, we have the Fallen King. I want to begin by talking about him because, well, he's just the guy that everyone knows. The Fallen King is the leader of the Fallen faction, a race of undead lost warriors brought back to life by the power of the Void. A majority of the Fallen armies fall under the command of the King. However, some, presumably more zealoty Fallen, lean more towards the Void Reaver and the Void Caster. I'm pointing this out because I am deliberately not counting any Fallen from Hardcore in this video, as they fall under their own little jurisdiction. The Fallen appear to be very religious and magic-focused, being proficient in necromancy and spellcasting. They seem to worship the god known as Lord Exo, and, with the help of a God Cube fragment, the Fallen King is able to tap into some of those powers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What can the base Fallen King actually do? Well, for starters, he is quite large, towering over the towers, who we will consider to be average human height. Given his size and the power of his sword swings, he also possesses superhuman strength. The Fallen King at first glance seems to be extremely weak. His boss fight doesn't show many powers that he has, other than his innate durability and necromancy. This is due to the twist of Fallen mode, which is revealed during the Hidden Wave. The Fallen King that you fight normally is a phantom. Once the Hidden Wave begins, and the king is enchanted by the power of the God Cube that he found, he awakens into his true, much more powerful form. In his awakened state, the Fallen King is much faster, more erratic, and has the ability to summon small-scale lightning storms and giant spikes from the sky. This man goes from an actual joke to a genuine threat. His forces are no slouches either. The Fallen army is large and tough, having a wide variety of soldiers at their disposal. Fallen squires, shielders, tanks, rushers, hazmats can all dominate the battlefield, while fallen angels and fallen souls and all those other things can just blitz through the air. The most deadly force in the Fallen army are the Fallen Jesters, who have the ability to super boost members of their army in order to grant them super speed, super strength, or super durability. The Fallen are quite adaptable and magically inclined, only being held back by their lack of technology and just a general air of mystery to their army. We don't know much about them, and therefore they don't really have any feats for us to compare. We can judge from this one line in the Fallen Hazmat says during the trailer that they've been defeated before, and when that's the only thing we know about you in terms of lore, that's not really the best news ever. But overall, the Fallen King is surprisingly tough, and commands an incredibly menacing army. I wonder how the others will fare against him.
Greetings, my friend.
Next, we have the Overlord. The Overlord is the final boss of Tower Blitz's Expert Mode. He's an extremely powerful being with a lot of resources at his disposal. As the 9th ranking member of the X-Council and the leader of all their forces within the Orion Arm, the Overlord is no pushover. Formerly known as Kronos, he possessed time manipulation powers and the ability to subjugate entire planets. Despite all this power and strength, however, he could not save himself from the truth of the universe. Ordinarily, this would cause someone to become ificated as a byproduct of the universe's failsafe. Despite this being a universal failsafe, by the way, something that the universe does to protect the truth of the universe, Kronos was able to fight off this corruption and resist it. Although it came at great cost to himself. He had to have his powers forcibly suppressed, locking them away forever. If he ever were to turn back into Kronos, which according to canon he can't do as far as everything I've seen, he would become unstable, erratic, and uncontrollable due to the truth being too much to bear. In his Overlord form, he is much weaker, but do not let this deceive you, he is still deathly powerful. The Overlord can conjure up intense lightning storms, rain meteors down from the sky, or manipulate the elements using his trusty staff. He can also boost his own speed and defense, making him incredibly threatening. His ace in the hole are his Overlord amplifiers, powerful robotic creations that artificially boost his strength. My guess is that the Overlord has amplifiers created so that he can artificially reach the power that he once had as Kronos, which, if that's the case, and I'm going to treat it like that's the case, that is pretty insane. The Overlord's biggest asset, however, is not himself, or even his amplifiers for that matter, but rather his massive, omnipresent army. The Overlord commands multiple different species of aliens under his control, ranging from the mindless peons to forces of nature. The Overlord has it all at his disposal. His forces include infantry, vehicles, tanks, drones, spaceships, motherships, and legions of other troops, ranging from robots to engineers to everything in between. The largest division is overseen by the Robotic Overseer, a powerful death machine that long ago was organic. Ignoring the largest portion of his army, the Overlord can call upon his Vanguards and the Avant-Garde, robotic clones of an ancient warrior who serves the X-Faction. He has many other allies at his disposal, such as the Corrupted and the Avarians and the Kugelblitz. However, given that they are their own separate species and not purely part of the X-Faction, they do not count for this video. Regardless, with all these powers and abilities the Overlord has at his disposal, it is certainly difficult to even fathom how anyone can stand up to him. His army has multiple battleships built for them known as the Blisses of Finality, some of which the UEC stole for themselves, but the X-Faction likely has hundreds of them, given that the engineers mentioned building multiple of them. The X-Faction even has a massive capital ship known as the Ark. However, it was never fully seen while Tower Blitz was alive. Regardless, the Overlord and his armies are absolutely insane and are capable of annihilating everything in their wake. They would have completely destroyed the UEC and the entire planet of Earth if it weren't for the Tower Blitz people having that same technology and using it against them. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have the Void. Hailing from the abyss, and described by John Roblox himself as an ancient elder god, this founding father is immediately no pushover. While he didn't do much in the original tower battles, TDX gave him a gargantuan boost to just about every metric, allowing the Void to live up to his full potential. Not much is known about where he originally comes from, but we do know that he is ancient, to the point where even the Calamity and the Awakened mimic him in the present day. The Void was able to instantaneously start a worldwide zombie apocalypse, and if it weren't for the GDA being formed in response, he would have brought all of Earth to its knees. His armies are not exactly the strongest things around, with it mostly being made up of a bunch of zombies, necromancers, and mutants. However, there are a few heavy hitters among them. Guardians are few in number, but exponentially powerful, seeing as they run on the same energy as the Void. And of course, the Void has his Endbringers, an otherworldly, endless horde of monsters who can kill and destroy anything with a single wave of their hammers. However, despite all this, the real star of the show here is the Void himself. Despite the usual stomps, summons, and ear-piercing screams, the Void is just an eldritch being in nature. He can control storms of purple lightning and rain down meteors from the sky with ease. With his insane telekinetic powers, the Void is able to levitate multiple warships into the sky and then send them crashing back down again with the force strong enough to instantaneously destroy them. The Void also possesses the power of flight, and also created obelisks to house his power and teleport his armies to and from. These obelisks persist even after the Void's death, as some can still be found in use by the Awakened, and also in the Calamity's domain Scorched Passage. So we can also add teleportation to his list of many abilities, which is how he's able to spread his corruption across the world. Speaking of corruption, the Void's ace in the hole is his conversion magic. The Void can create a storm around himself, and anything in his immediate vicinity becomes corrupted and fights for him. And it's not just people. Mechanical towers like Sentry, Railgunner, and Artillery can also be corrupted, despite the fact that they are automated. Units, even powerful ones such as Zed and Relic, can be corrupted as well, including the elusive Overseer. Even massive vehicles, such as helicopters and warships, are vulnerable to the corruption, and the Void can use this to his advantage by evening the odds. We see that the Awakened, a cult that uses a definitively weaker version of the Void's corruption magic, were able to convert Predators, Eradicator Mark II, and even the Apex Predator to their side. Considering, once again, that they could do it with a much more limited form of corruption magic, it's safe to assume that the Void's possession can match the same level of power, especially since he is shown to be able to corrupt machines. Oh yeah, and apparently the Void has the ability to either freeze time or living beings in place. It's not quite clear exactly what John meant with this saying right here, but it's clear he's doing something with his hands here in this animation. Overall, the Void is literally a one-man army, being able to single-handedly turn the tide of any battle in his favor with a simple wave of his hand. His forces are quite weak, but span across the entire planet, with him even having access to a mysterious, endless horde. The Void is certainly a force to be reckoned with. Now that we've gone over our three contestants, it's time to compare the three to each other in order to see which army and, in turn, boss is truly the strongest. Unfortunately, unlike the good people over at Death Battle, I do not have the skills nor the means to show you how this hypothetical war would play out, so this is the best I can do. Sorry. Anyways, I will now compare these three bosses in 4 categories: physical stats, magical abilities, armies, and trump cards. When it comes to physical stats, it's clear that all three are strong. It's just not clear how strong they exactly are to each other. For AFK, it's especially difficult, but we can make a few assumptions based on how the God Cube interacts with him. I believe that the God Cube fragments change your body to match how much strength the cube is contributing to make the bosses as threatening as they are. For example, we see that with enemies like Umbra, Titus, and Patient Zero, the God Cube fragment significantly alters their appearance. But with other enemies like the Dracobloxer and Krampus, they were already very powerful beings that didn't undergo much physical change. For the Awakened Falling King, he falls into this latter camp of just kind of changing his color and having his mouth exposed. The Awakened Falling King must have been very strong, at the very least, for the physical change to not really affect him that much. Despite all of that I just said, the Void and the Overlord easily outclass him, and I think it's pretty obvious. The Void's screams are strong enough to create shockwaves that destroy vehicles, and the Overlord merely has to clap his hands and lightning storms are generated. Even in his awakened state, being able to also summon lightning and spikes, the Overlord could simply throw it all back at him with his telekinetic powers. The Void could easily do the same. When it comes to raw physical strength, I do believe it does come down to the Void, as his stomps and screams create shockwaves strong enough to destroy, once again, heavily armored vehicles, and we don't see the Overlord get his hands dirty like that, as he's more about magical prowess. Speed goes to the Overlord, with the Void just being average in speed, and AFK, he can boost his own natural speed. His speed-enhancing powers are not on the same level as the Overlord's. Magical abilities are certainly a toss-up. All three of these guys are potent magic users, and an argument could be made that all three of them possibly the strongest magic users in their own respective games. However, I think once again the Fallen King falls short of the other two. His necromantic powers simply don't really hold a candle to the Void, who started a global zombie apocalypse just by a wave of his hands a few times, or Kronos, who was able to defy the laws of the universe by resisting ification, while also commanding an entire army. The Overlord's magic feat is certainly the most impressive here, so it's yet another victory for him. The Overlord's telekinetic powers are wild, at least when it comes to his telekinetic defense. Now we can get into the most critical part of this entire argument, the armies. The Void's zombie army, while it does span the entire globe, does not really hold a candle to the other two armies. Sure, his Endbringers are definitely an extra tough problem, however, they are still very slow and can easily be killed. The Void just doesn't have a very strong army or notable troops that would be able to keep up in the fight. The Fallen armies are quite massive and organized, and the existence of Fallen Jesters does serve to make them even stronger, but even still, the sheer might and presence and number of the X-Faction outnumbers them 1,000-fold. With all their ships, tanks, trucks, munitions, and soldiers, a battle between the X-Faction and the Fallen would basically just be a normal round of TDS, where the Fallen absolutely get blitzed, pun intended, by the Overlord. Finally, we have trump cards. The Awakened Fallen King can create a phantom of himself to fight. The Overlord has his extremely deadly amplifiers, which are able to boost his strength all the way back up to his Kronos form temporarily. However, I believe that the Void's aces blow these out of the water. The Void can pick up multiple warships, massive boats weighing multiple hundreds of tons, take them up into the air and just throw them, immediately destroying them. It doesn't matter how far away they are or what level or what size they are, he can just toss these things as he pleases. If the X-Faction were to invade Earth, the Void could simply grab their spaceships, pull them out of orbit, and just beach them completely, destroy them. His added power of flight ensures that he could get a better reach as well. The Void's corruption magic is also incredibly potent and has a very wide range. I mentioned how it scales with the Awakened, but given that the corruption seems to work on advanced machinery such as Eradicator Mark II, Apex Predator, and the Golden Towers, I believe that the Void would have no trouble turning the X-Faction's robotics against each other. The Robotic Overseer and the Vanguards are especially vulnerable, especially since the Robotic Overseer is so similar to the Eradicators in biology, that being an organic being that was turned into a mostly robot. The Void's corruption has its limits. He wouldn't be able to mess with AFK or the Overlord themselves, because of the Overlord's resistance to mind control, and the Awakened Fallen King already having Lord Exo and the Godkeep Fragment dominating his psyche. The entirety of the Fallen Army and a majority of the X-Faction would be greatly vulnerable to the Void's corruption. In a three-way battle, the Awakened Fallen King would likely be overpowered by the X-Faction's army, and his surviving troops could easily be converted to fall under the Void. Since the corruption lasts forever until a tower is Ubered or sold, things the Void corrupts would remain loyal to him. The Void could just take the Robotic Overseer and cost the Overlord a hefty amount of his fighting force. But the Overlord does have a counter to this, as he himself, once again, is immune to the Ification, which I would argue is way more powerful than the Void's corruption, so he himself is completely immune to this attack. At this point, it all comes down to how much the Overlord is willing to throw at the Void. The Void could theoretically spawn an infinite amount of troops, pulling spawns out of his body, or just conjuring more zombies into existence. The X-Faction War Machine is gargantuan, but in an all-out battle where they are throwing everything they have at their disposal, it's only a matter of time before the Void's corruption gets them, or he just obliterates them with his telekinetic powers. And this leads us to the ultimate 1v1 scenario. I think that we've established that the Void's more impressive brute strength and levitation provide him an edge over the more regal and magic-focused Overlord. Even with his amplifiers, they wouldn't be able to realistically save him for long. Unless he makes the amplifiers in incredibly remote locations, the Void can easily locate and destroy them. If the Overlord had some way to unsuppress his power and return to the full might of Kronos, his time manipulation powers would be more than enough to obliterate the Void. But in canon, it seems like there is no way that he could return himself to his former state. And because of this, the Void's overwhelming telekinetic abilities and sheer brute force overpower the more defensive Overlord, making him the true victor here. A battle between the two would certainly be close, and there are quite a few ways the Overlord could win, like, say, if each side was allowed help for their armies, then the Overlord would easily win because the corrupted would just iificate everything. Overall, however, while the Void may be a big fish in a small pond, said pond has given him all the tools he needs to survive in this ocean. The X-Faction is structured very similarly to Dr. Xenon's army and the GDA, including many of the same technological strengths and weaknesses, and the Void's abilities are specifically designed to exploit those. If the X-Faction came at him with a capital fleet of Blissophinalities, he could just corrupt some, then soar into the air, and then bring the others crashing down to the surface. And before you question whether or not the Void would be able to corrupt or destroy the Blisses, keep in mind that the Void isn't corrupting the helicopters or the warships themselves, since they aren't automated machines. He's corrupting the crew inside. Since the UEC need to man these ships, it's safe to assume that the X-Faction also has to manually man these ships. So the Void would be corrupting the people inside, not necessarily the ship itself. So yes, he would be able to corrupt some Blisses or completely destroy Blisses. Once again, we know that Glacius, it being much weaker and more frail than even the suppressed Overlord, could obliterate a Bliss of Finality in just one shot. So the Void, the guy who can lift up multiple warships the same size as a Bliss, could easily mess with them too, especially given his power of flight. And before people bring up his ability to resist the natural laws of the universe, please keep in mind that he achieved this in a much stronger form, a form that was completely broken. He just can't access it. I'm talking about the Overlord here. In the end though, I think we can all agree that the Awakened Fallen King is the definitive loser here. His lack of lore, as well as his underwhelming abilities, makes him an absolute joke when held up to the scrutiny of other games. Sorry, not sorry. But anyways, that's all I've got for this video. What do you think of these types of Roblox power scaling videos? Should I do more of them? Leave your opinions in the comments, and while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe, and because this video took forever to make, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.